Okay, hello, and welcome to Essex Wildlife Trust webinar again for our urban wildlife champions and wilder communities. As I'm sure a few of you know now, I am Danielle Carbott, the Wilder Communities Manager at Essex Wildlife Trust, and I lead on the Urban Wildlife Champions and Next Door Nature projects. So thank you so much for joining us on our second to last webinar for 2022 today. I know some of you here today were very keen on attending our in-person tree nursery workshop, but were unable to. So I hope I can support you through this session today. As usual, this is a webinar, so you will not be able to turn on your camera or microphone. But again, if you've got questions, put them in the chat. There's a chat bubble at the top, and I will try and answer them at the end. You can also email me any questions at a later date. Alex, who led the community tree workshop from Thames Chase Forest Centre, would also be happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the on-site tree nursery they have. So I can forward any queries you have there. So yeah, session 6 this evening will focus on community woodland creation with a specific focus on the Miyawaki method. Tree planting has like almost become a bit of a buzz solution, with many planted in the wrong place, sadly, or at the wrong time. So today I will help you understand how to plant, plan, and care for your saplings to ensure they have the best chance of survival. So first, let us think about why, because I'm sure many of you on this webinar may be looking into or wondering why we need more native woods and trees, either to encourage your local community to get involved, or potentially to have the backing of your local community, your local council, or just to capture and engage various other stakeholders. Our landscapes here in the UK have evolved to hold native woods and trees, with much of our wildlife sort of co-evolving and adapting to live in these distinctive landscapes. Our flora, so our flower species, and our fauna, our animal species, have adapted to the geology, soils, and conditions they hold. Unfortunately, these landscapes have changed, as many of you know, meaning that our woodland networks have become fragmented and degraded. We now have a low coverage of trees across the UK, about 13.2% of land area. So it is so important we re-establish these networks where we can, so nature can recover. Today, we will also have a focus on native planting because it's estimated that only about half of the cover we have today is native, with the rest being sort of non-native conifer or broadleaf plantations. And here is just a visual on the screen to demonstrate that, which has been produced by the Woodland Trust. If you'd like to have that, I can send through the link to their website so you can use that and share that with your community. Within this, as I just mentioned, the Woodland Trust, they've also highlighted the effect diminishing woodland cover has had on the UK on our wildlife. For example, woodland butterfly species, they've declined by 41% on average since 1990, which for some of us doesn't feel very long ago, and woodland birds by 29% since 1970. So it's a very much a downward trend at the moment, and that is mainly due to that sort of fragmentation and also the quality of our woodlands as well. And with further threats ahead, such as climate change, which will bring with it, pest and disease impact, alongside amplifying the challenges of drought, fire, and storm or flood events, there is really no better time to be planting and creating a community woodland. Woods and trees themselves will also help us to adapt to these challenges, providing flood risk reductions, pollution control, and temperature regulation in our cities, towns, and villages. Now let us dive deeper into the Miyawaki method itself. Essentially, it is an effective tree planting method that is based on natural reforestation principles, a jump start, if you like, into the creation of woodland, with considerable benefits for both carbon capture and recreating that wildlife-rich woodland habitat. You'll see on the screen here that the man there who first developed this approach Dr. Akira Miyawaki, a Japanese botanist and professor who received the 2006 Blue Planet Prize. He actually tried and tested this method and technique by planting 1,000 tiny forests on patches of wasteland across Japan. There have to date been about 3,000 successful projects around the world, and those numbers are increasing across Europe with lots of different examples in the UK. There are now various organisations in the UK that support this type of planting project, and I've got a few on the screen there, such as Earthwatch, Tomorrow's Forest, and Suji Project. Project has specifically done quite a lot in London. And for many of you, obviously being urban wildlife champions, the reason that this is at the forefront today is this method is most effective in urban areas. So right in in the heart of our towns and cities. It can also be used on sort of small pockets or parcels of land to develop woodland ecosystems, such as on things like recreational grounds, parks, or unused green spaces. So just as a bit of an insight, here we have some examples of the method across the UK. Here we've got one right in the heart of London, which is called Sanctuary Forest. As you can see, that's in the middle of two roads and buildings, so sort of proves that this can be done anywhere. We've also got one there in East London, which is on a secondary school playing field, Natura Nostra Forest. We've also got an example in Barking and Dagenham and in Dagenham itself. The Forest of Thanks, this is a picture of it a few years into development. So you can see some of those saplings starting to grow and turning into that scrub habitat. And then you've got the one here in Eastbrook Forest, which is a picture of the planting. Another example we've got here in Wales, which is a tiny forest. And as you can see there, it's sort of where they've marked out the boundary of the woodland that they want to create. It's got sort of a seating area and then a path going through. Also one in Swindon, another tiny forest. You can see the fence line where the planting has taken place. Again, that's on a recreational ground. Got one here called Five Trees in Cambridge. This was on council land. Again, a small patch just been prepared. Similarly in East Lansing as well, another tiny forest one. You've got one here in Glasgow, Scotland, Oakwood Primary Forest. Again, this was on a patch of land, and you've got Whitney Tiny Forest, so council owned land, and then also another kind of park recreational area there as well. So they're just a few examples of where communities across the UK have used this method to create those community woodlands. So, initial planning around this vision, and I think it's always really good to start with the planning because for tree planting, it can sometimes feel like you just want to get out there straight away and get your saplings in the ground. But planning is the most important part because establishing woodland is a long term process. So, to capture your aspirations, first think about the rationale to enable you to engage and consult the relative stakeholders from the outset. And it helps to create that sense of wider ownership with your community. You and your community's visions should focus around how woodland creation will support both people and wildlife. Perhaps you have a focus on nature recovery, climate change, water, air, landscape, or peoples. Whatever the main focus is, highlight the direct impacts the creation of woodland will have with councils, with your communities, with organisations. Just get out and about and share your vision. Successful champions have benefited from writing a proposal or an action plan to provide a brief description of the overall plans and objectives. Successful champions have also benefited from consultations, not anything formal, but involving others in the process, so hearing other voices and bringing people together. Creating a community woodland, hence the name, cannot be done alone. Initial planning should also focus on the site itself. You need a sound understanding of your site, the constraints, context, characteristics, and features present. So, in some cases, it's just a really great idea to complete a site survey or to kind of map out any existing features such as trees, water sources, hedgerows, ancient or veteran trees, grassland, boundaries, any hard infrastructure that might be there, and any neighbouring landscapes. And there's a few examples on there, again, provided by the Woodland Trust, but it doesn't have to be anything intense, maybe just printing off an aerial photo of the area and the site that you're looking at and sort of annotating it and marking on there the different features that are in that site, just so you can get a real idea of what's going on. Understanding what habitats are already present and the species that may already be using the site is also key. Local residents may be able to help form this picture from observations or just generally getting an idea of local knowledge. What's going on that site? What species have already been seen? What do people know about it? If possible as well, maybe find out what soil type is on the site too, such as sort of clay soil or loamy or sandy. This is important so the native trees picked suit the environment and the landscape. And I'll go into a bit of detail later on in the webinar about that. But clay soils, for example, are high in nutrients but can become compacted and are susceptible to cracking when dry and then also waterlog when wet. Loamy soils are often easily eroded but have good nutrient levels. And sandy soils have lower nutrient levels and are most easily eroded and should be undisturbed where possible. Also, look for on your site any non native invasive species that may become a problem due to competition, so things like rhododendron. But yeah, but basically, overall, an understanding of a site will not only help planting to be more successful, but will help you to understand whether the site itself is suitable for tree planting. For example, grassland sites that have high floral species already present should not be planted on, and similarly for areas of marshland or salt marsh, they should also not be planted on. So it just gives you a real key insight into whether the site you're looking at is suitable. Just for some of you as well, you may also need to complete an environmental impact assessment through a notification and basic application. So this is only if your project is above the threshold of impact. So contacting a government woodland officer or advisor can be useful here to gain an understanding of whether this is necessary or not. The agencies responsible for the administration of the regulation here in England is the Forestry Commission. They publish periodically updated thresholds and guidance in each county for the environmental impact assessments. Currently, I think it is zero point 0.5 hectares, but please do double check that beforehand. So, honestly, in most cases, your projects will be under that threshold, so not necessarily something you need to worry about. Initial planning will also feed forward into the design of your community woodland. As you all know, woodlands are not just comprised of trees, but they contain a community of flora, so different flower species, and fauna, so different animal species, that all play an important role in maintaining a woodland and allowing it to thrive. So, to create a healthy woodland community, we've got that kind of vertical habitat that compromises of different and multiple layers. And that should be the aim when you're looking at your tree planting project. And here on the screen, you will see an example of this. So for a woodland to truly flourish, it must contain this kind of multi-story structure. And these layers are so the ground layer at the bottom, and this refers to everything growing on the woodland floor, such as your grasses, mosses, lichens, and fungi, as well as your leaf litter, a really important habitat, almost serves as a habitat in its own right, and it's more often than not the site for decomposition. You've then got the next one, which is field layer. This is made up of grasses or ferns and flowering plants. It's the sort of lower vegetation level. And this level is very dependent on the amount of light that's able to penetrate through the canopy. But it really is an essential layer. It's an essential resource for a variety of our species. And this is the reason you often see coppicing in woodlands to allow the light to filter on into the field layer so more grasses, ferns, and flowering plants can flourish. Then on top of the field layer, you've got the sort of understory layer, or some people call it the shrub layer. This layer is simply comprised of younger, smaller trees and shrubs that are evolved to grow with less light. So they're just underneath that canopy layer. And then, of course, the top one, which we're all really familiar with, is that canopy layer. This layer is where you find the tallest of trees and they receive the most sunlight. And these are more often than not the more sort of dominant species and tend to comprise of species such as, oak. If your canopy is too thick, then, as I said before, then little light can penetrate the lower levels, reducing the amount of wildlife present. So, those layers and how thick they are and how much of them there is really relevant to how much wildlife you will see in your woodland. Now, obviously, we can't create this multi-story structure like that in a few steps. But planting in the Miyawaki method can help to accelerate this process through ecosystem restoration because it creates sort of resilience and that kind of natural succession. It promotes a diversity of microclimates too. So there's a range of resources for wildlife, such as food, shelter, light, and humidity. The varying structures and the density of vegetation really does drive nature's recovery. So it's not only just about connecting up those woodland landscapes, but also looking at the quality of the woodland that you're creating as well. So to achieve this thriving community, work out your design at your planning stage. Are you extending a woodland that already exists? Are you creating a brand new woodland? Are you adding to the mosaic of habitats? So, as in, are there various habitats creating that kind of patchwork effect, i.e., hedgerows, grasslands, and woodlands? If you're not creating that kind of mosaic of habitats, do you need to do that? Are you establishing a green corridor, so connecting habitats? And yeah, just overall, what's the plan? What's the ethos behind your community woodland? And these sort of questions and answers will really help to shape your initial plan and design. Within the planning, and I've sort of reached that stage where we're going to talk about the types of trees, also identify local native tree species that can be used. In other words, sort of vegetation that would occur in a specific area without human interference. Also ensure you have identified species that will add to the structural diversity. So back to that kind of multi-story effect, as mentioned before. What will the canopy layer comprise of? What will the shrub layer comprise of? For example, and what will it look like as it develops over those years? In some cases, neighbouring native woodland will give you an indication of trees that thrive in your local area. So go for a walk around your city, town, or village. What are those native tree species in maybe patches of wood that you're familiar with? Because they'll give you that great sort of indication of what you should be going for. It can also help you understand if there's any kind of really localized native species. Things like white beam and elm can be quite localized. So if you've got those near you in your locality, then it might be something to think about. And of course, a mixture of species is also truly paramount to ensure resilience. Planting just one species will mean that the kind of wildlife that you see will be lowered. It won't be biodiverse. It won't be rich in different plants. So it's really important to kind of get a mix of different species. So for many of you today, you will be looking for tree communities that thrive in lowland landscapes on either a kind of acidic soil or base rich kind of clayey soil. So first of all, let's look at acidic lowland communities. And they're really good for species such as English oak, silver birch, downy birch, hazel, beech, hornbeam, and holly. They're really great options for kind of acidic soils in lowland communities. And then if your site is sort of more clay, it's more base rich. Um, so base rich lowland community species that will thrive there are things like ash, wych elm, field maple, silver birch, English oak again, hazel, beech, hornbeam, small-leaved lime, and hawthorn. They're great options. And of course, if your site and you think it might sort of get seasonally wet or potentially waterlogged, or maybe is beside water bodies or has a higher water table, then you might also consider things like alder, black poplar, crack willow, and white willow. You may also want to include, as you develop the woodland, some field layer options too. So, thinking back to that acidic lowland community, try things like bluebells, wood anemones, primroses, wood avens, wood ruff, black bryony, herb robert, wood melic, or yellow archangel, sorry. Um, Oh, sorry, that was for the base rich one. My apologies. And then we'll look at the acidic lowland communities. Plants such as creeping soft grass, honeysuckle, butcher's broom, and scaly male fern would work. And then if your area, your site is quite wet, maybe go for things like yellow pimpernel, wood sorrel, honeysuckle, dog's mercury, wild garlic, bugle, enchanter's nightshade, again wood avens, ivy, tufted hairgrass are all really great options too. And I can send these lists through to you. So if you're not too sure on what species you should be picking, and then later down the line maybe enhancing that field layer, then yeah, let me know. I can send through a list of different species that would be really good for your site. I can come and look at your site as well, and we can have a chat about what tree species would be best. It is also sometimes assumed that native species will not thrive in sort of more urban areas, but if well matched to the location, it can be a really great resource for pollinators, bats, and birds. Also, to think about, if you are in a kind of really urbanized, built up location, some tree species may need to reflect those kind of requirements in that specific environment. For example, oak trees wouldn't be the best option if space is limited. So yeah, it's really important at this stage to kind of think carefully about what trees to be using, what's the environment, what will suit that location. For the Miyawaki method, high numbers of saplings are needed. So around kind of 3 or 4 every square meter. So it's quite a lot of saplings compared to your kind of traditional planting, as shown on the screen here. So in some cases, developing a community nursery and sort of growing the plants from collected local seeds can be cheaper. This can be done in a community space or simply in people's gardens. If you've got a lot of volunteers or a lot of community members that are interested in helping with creating a community woodland, they might be up for having, saplings growing in their gardens. And it's so fun to go out and collect your local seeds from trees. I'm one of those people that kind of, as I'm out walking, I'll pick up the acorns, I'll pick up the conkers, I'll pop them in my pocket. So it's a really nice activity to do, and it can get younger people involved. Children from schools find that really exciting. So in a way, for the Miyawaki method, because you've got to plant so many, that can be a really great option. It also means that the woodland is hyper local, and you have control over where your trees have come from. If you do decide to go down that route of kind of doing a community tree nursery, make sure that you try and collect large quantities of seed to try and avoid genetic bottlenecking. If collecting seeds and running a community tree nursery isn't an option, as I have mentioned in my last webinars, I do highlight funding that is available every month that can be used for projects such as this. And of course, Woodland Trust do also provide free tree packs to communities every single year. So yeah, once you know where you are obtaining your trees from, you've planned out where your trees are going to be planted, you've got that kind of design in your mind. The Miyawaki method advocates for random planting at high density, so not in uniform, spaced out planting. And this is to generally mimic natural processes. So therefore, figure out kind of where the boundary lines for your new woodland can be, and then it can be fairly randomized as to where you end up planting within that boundary. So think about things, like what shape do you want it? What size do you want this community woodland to be? How will people also enjoy this community woodland? Is it going to be kind of a packed woodland that people can then walk around? Are you going to have a path going through it? How are people going to access it if they want to enjoy that community woodland? How are you going to access it to maintain it as well? How does it also connect to other habitats in the area? As I've said, is it kind of joining on to a woodland that's already there? Is it totally brand new? Is it near a hedgerow? So think about, whereabouts on your site it will be. If you're also putting in your woodland in kind of a small urban site, make sure you're thinking about access to the space. Make sure it's not blocked or compromised. Because I know a lot of people do this in kind of recreational grounds. So you still want people to be able to come in and enjoy that area, particularly over the summer months and the spring months, where they're going and having picnics or using the area to play. So it's just some of those things that you need to think about. Are you also ensuring there is ample space between kind of other infrastructure such as roads, or is it far away enough from public bins or street lights and things like that? So these questions will help with the overall design and layout. And again, often mapping out or drawing a design can be really handy. So you will have had that kind of site map, maybe then drawing on your idea of the shape of your woodland, where the paths might be, how big it's going to be. It can just be really handy to kind of give a real sense of what the woodland will look like once it's been planted. You may also want to consider how you'll be protecting your trees. Now, the use of plastic guards is popular and is pretty much the standard practice, but it can cause long term accumulation of microplastics in the soil. So, in response here, for us at Essex Wildlife Trust, we have now launched a plastic free tree planting policy, and we would definitely advise any community group looking to plant trees to do the same. So, other options to plastic include tubeless trees. If you are in an area where herbivore browsing isn't an issue, and this is definitely the case for many urban sites, then plastic guards really are not needed. Even if you think browsing may occur in places such as villages, so if your community project is in a village, low browsing pressures can actually lead to sort of more diverse growth forms and won't prevent unsuccessful establishment. In some cases, and you will have seen that in the pictures of the examples, adding in a kind of perimeter or boundary fence, or something maybe a little bit more natural to highlight and protect the samplings rather than kind of individually guarding them, can be really useful. Within the Miyawaki method, anyway, as mentioned, planting is at very high densities, so that's very much favoured. So guards really aren't necessary anyway. If you feel guards are essential, so maybe you do have kind of high herbivore browsing in your area, then plastic free products are great. There are some really good examples out there. We've been trialing some at our Nature Discovery Centre at Abberton Reservoir. We're using the one on screen, so Grown Green. They're kind of thick cardboard guards that are compostable. They seem to be doing well so far. So there are some fantastic options out there. After all the planning, I feel like that was a big chunk there of planning. It is now time to put that plan into action. So, the fun part. During your kind of engagement with stakeholders and the immediate communities, you will hopefully have drummed up enough interest to have a team of volunteers to help with planting. The more people from your community you have involved or engaged, the more successful this woodland will be. It will be, a lasting legacy for that community. So involve schools, other groups, scouts, youth groups, art groups, on the doorstep residents, the list goes on. Reach out to local organisation. I mean, who doesn't love to plant a tree? So yeah, drum up as much interest as you can and you'll have those volunteers ready to rock and roll. The best time to plant is in October to kind of November. So do plan this into your timeline. So you've pretty much missed this season, but this is the time to kind of plan ready for that 2023 season. That will give you plenty of time to get that community woodland plan in place and, talk to and engage with various stakeholders. So, when planting the trees, when you get to that stage, the ground must first be prepared. And there are two options with the Miyawaki method. So, option number one, and this is used quite a lot in urban sites, is to remove the topsoil. Some projects, to increase the soil's diversity, quality, and nutrient value, topsoil has been removed and then replaced with kind of organic soil supplements, which also acts as a mulch. And this will help soils that have become sort of compacted, waterlogged, or generally just degraded over time. This option, of course, is not needed if the soil is already in good condition. So, option two, dig holes of kind of half a metre to a metre in depth. Um, and then fill them up with organic matter such as leaf litter, compost, which is also mixed with the original soil. And this again acts as a mulch. This option minimizes competitive vegetation growth on nutrient-rich soils. So if you think that your soil is already quite sort of nutrient rich, this is a really good one to use. But of course, any ground preparation comes with its risks, such as disruption of the soil's ecosystem, soil erosion, and runoff. So do ensure you choose the correct option for your site. However, after all your trees are in, your job is still not done. Aftercare for saplings, I believe, is one of the most important parts of the cycle. So although we don't water our established kind of street trees, woodlands, or small copses, it is absolutely paramount to water our newly emerging woodlands. So plan into your project this essential piece of aftercare. Find like a nearby water source and ensure you have easy access and permission to use it. And although watering isn't needed forever, it is of great benefit to be watering regularly for the first 2 years. A team of waterers or an agreement with your council to have this added to management plans for the space will ensure your tree's success. This year, I have visited a number of sites that struggle to survive through the summer months, even before the drought, and in many cases, a system to water had not been set up. So it was kind of an ad hoc panic dash to water new saplings, and that can mean that lots of the saplings don't survive that the first summer. So yeah, definitely my number one recommendation. And even though planting at high density will lessen the vegetation that kind of grows in and around your saplings, physical removal of some of those plants will be needed to kind of promote effective tree growth. You've probably seen where sort of trees have been planting, and then you've got a lot of different plants kind of competing with that sapling, growing up around it, and also potentially taking away the light source. So um, general kind of hand removal of these plants can be great to ensure that the roots have enough space to develop and not get out competed. Manual weeding is the best option here to ensure limited damage. And of course, this is really only possible on small sites or if you've got kind of a team of volunteers. So it really is perfect for the Miyawaki method. Jobs that need a lot of hands are also a great way of involving local schools or groups such as scouts and guides. Mulching continuously can also be an option to reduce intense growth of vegetation, such as kind of wood chips, straw, or bark. You will have seen in the example photos that lots of groups, after planting, have kind of covered the area with one of these types of mulch because it suppresses the growth of other plants in the first kind of 2 years or so to ensure the trees have enough time to establish. We would also recommend avoiding herbicides because although they seem like an easy fix and help to reduce dominant vegetation really quickly, there are concerns around the impact of using targeted chemical use such as glyphosate on both wildlife and human health. If you are having issues around this conversation, perhaps with your council or volunteers or local community, then I would definitely recommend visiting the Pesticide Action Network UK. There is kind of a wealth of information on the site, particularly for local councils, that will help to navigate this issue. Promoting successful establishment through these actions, the various ones I've just mentioned, will need to continue until kind of acceptable levels of tree establishment are achieved. This will be different for each site, so I can't give you kind of like a recommended amount of years, but it will help, doing these actions to ensure the success of your project. For many, establishment will take sort of between 2 to 4 years as the average, depending on the environment, landscape, and soil. So having that in your plan is a really good place to start. So as I've mentioned a few times, the Miyawaki method uses high density planting, which is really advantageous for establishment. However, just as any other woodland creation site may need further development down the line. In some cases, particularly if you're working with your council, a management plan may be useful again to look at kind of a 10-year vision. Again, something to consider, yeah, looking at during the planning phase. The Woodland Trust have produced a wonderful image to highlight this, which can be seen on the right of your screen here. So you've got that top image that shows a really thick canopy. So you've got very dense, tall trees with not much light penetrating through. And so you're missing that kind of ground and field and shrub layer that I mentioned before. So if that happens to your woodland, some intervention may be needed as suggested, to kind of go into that kind of middle image that you can see, and then to your end goal, which is the final image at the bottom. So this can be achieved through a number of options on an urban site. So the first is small scale re-spacing. So you may have selected some key species such as oak or ash that are being crowded out. They're the more kind of dominant canopy species. So in the early phase, from kind of like 3 to 10 years, cutting to give selective trees space can help. So you don't get that kind of overcrowded feeling. These trees that you're kind of giving extra space will also be your future veteran trees that provide microhabitats that cannot be replicated by younger or smaller trees. Further down the line, you can also then look at coppicing. So once the trees are more established, say sort of 10 to 15 years into creation, you may need to consider coppicing appropriate species to create sort of stem density, varying growth rates, and overall diversity, such as in that sort of bottom image there where you've got, your canopy layer of a more dominant species, you've got that sort of shrub layer, field layer, and ground layer. Now, I haven't got time to go into coppicing tonight, but as always, site visits, online meetings, in-person chats, or meetings with yourself and your community groups can be arranged to discuss these elements of a community woodland. And I'm here to help. So if some of this feels a bit alien, yeah, just give me an email. During this process, you are more than likely to collect wood. So even if it's kind of small branches or logs, or even if you've got kind of abundance of those on site already, anything collected from these practices should be left on site because decaying wood is such an important part of a woodland ecosystem. So avoiding that kind of neat and tidy look is essential. Create log piles as shown on the left there, or log stands as shown on the right, to help create space for things like voles, stag beetles, hedgehogs, newts, and frogs. Leave kind of log piles in dappled shade and quite compacted to maintain humidity. You can also create dead hedges with kind of leftover branches, those images shown below. It not only helps to maintain kind of boundaries, but it can also be a really great way to mark out any footpaths that have been included. So, and it's quite easy. You don't necessarily need to kind of stake in your dead hedge. It can just be as simple as laying out different branches to kind of demarcate where your paths and kind of edges of the site are. On an urban site as well, kind of nest and roost boxes for bats can also be really helpful, particularly as the woodland is establishing and the new trees are kind of lacking those features. For more information on bat boxes, please see my previous webinar on our YouTube channel. It's on kind of a playlist called Urban Wildlife Champions, so you'll be able to find it there. I can also send it through to you if you aren't sure where to find that. Monitoring is also key as your woodland is establishing. This will give you an insight into the woodland community you're trying to establish, kind of simple site assessments throughout the year alongside simple species surveys can help you build a picture of the wildlife present. It can also be a great way to share impact with key stakeholders, so say organisations that you've got involved or councils or residents on the doorstep. It doesn't have to be anything in depth, but just to help, it gives that kind of snapshot of the wildlife you are seeing on site. There are also some really great apps that can help you with identification of different plants or insects, like iNaturalist, for example. You may even want to go down the route of a habitat condition assessment, which helps to assess kind of key indicators that define ecological condition. It involves a simple walkover of the site, but can also include more detailed monitoring. if you have volunteers who have the knowledge. In the initial development phase, this will include things like checking for tree damage, presence of invasive non native plants, the range of tree species that are developing, and any other plants present at kind of the field layer. However, that's really not essential. It can just be as simple as keeping an eye out for the wildlife and having volunteers do, simple surveys. As you know, to kind of help this as well, we delivered a 2022 program of workshop and webinars this year. Obviously, this is one of the webinars today, and we are currently pulling together a 2023 program of workshops and webinars in which I will be sending out to every single urban wildlife champion a survey just to capture what training or learning needs champions may need. So, this could be part of the program if requested. In the meantime, though, the Woodland Trust have a great, fantastic woodland creation guide, as mentioned in the kind of previous slide, which includes some tips on condition assessments. So I now just want to finish with an alternative action. So I've spoken a lot today about the Miyawaki method and tree planting and how to create a community woodland, which is very proactive and resource heavy. But there are other ways that can be used to develop a community woodland. It is a slower process, but one that doesn't cost or essentially take up too much resource. And in recent years, many are suggesting it kind of should be the default approach to woodland expansion, and that is natural regeneration. So as suggested, the Miyawaki method kind of speeds up that natural process. But depending on your site and vision, you may be in a situation where natural regeneration can be used to help UK's woodland network expand. So if you're looking to create a woodland adjacent to or in proximity to a wooded landscape, then this may be one to think about. You may wish to use it on the whole of your site, or in fact use it for parts of your site. And in short, if you don't know what natural regeneration is, and it's quite a new thing lots of people are talking about, it's allowing space to recolonize with native species on its own without planting or intervention. So it's how trees have reproduced throughout their millions of years of evolution. So it's that natural regeneration where plants and tree species will colonize areas through seed dispersal. So natural selection plays a role as well as adaptation. Trees that have established through natural regeneration can often be more resilient and generally survive better than planted trees. And most of those reasons is around kind of things like the roots of saplings have not been disturbed, so they haven't been sort of repotted and then popped into a different environment. And those tree species that have come along through natural regeneration have also adapted already to that local environment, the conditions that are already present. And it also helps to give a woodland its natural composition, with trees of different ages developing at different times. Often with tree planting, trees that go in are all of the same age, all of the same size, whereas natural regeneration can really help create those differing ages and differing kind of stages of development. As I'm sure you can imagine, it does require a relinquishment of control because you are encouraging succession. So there are a number of stages before you see a woodland become established. So patience is key. So, I mean, the action literally includes leaving a marked out site to grow, letting nature take lead. At first, your space may just be kind of a bare patch or grassy area near a woodland site. And once left with no mowing or any kind of intervention, this area will eventually succeed into scrub, a sort of transitory habitat, which is a thicket of small shrubs and trees such as bramble, blackthorn, willow, and hawthorn. Scrub is an essential habitat for many of our bird species, for example, as they are great nesting sites. They also tend to provide excellent pollen rich plants for bumblebees, solitary bees, hoverflies, and butterflies, for example. And in some cases, it may be beneficial to keep and manage some of the scrub habitat on site for this reason. But after a time, if you leave it again with no intervention, this scrub habitat will then succeed into a woodland where a closed canopy structure can begin to create. So, yeah, it's really as simple as that. Let it grow and see what happens. Again, however, it is important to note that if the site you are looking at for either of these actions, as mentioned above, is species rich grassland, so a patch of grass that has high numbers of floral species, creating a woodland just isn't suitable. So if you need support making any of these decisions, again, I am here to help. Okay, and that brings us to the end of our session. So thank you very much for coming along to the webinar today. We have again made sure we've got time for a few questions. So please do pop these in the chat if you have any, and I will try and answer them. But if you've got if you haven't got any questions, then it's been great seeing you today, and hopefully I'll chat to you in the future. See you later.